generation grew into adulthood, taking nature's gifts for granted. We assumed, when we thought of it at all, that generations to come would also receive these gifts. But something has changed. Now we see the emergence of what I have come to call nature deficit disorder. This term is by no means a medical diagnosis, but it does offer a way to think about the problem and the possibilities for children and for the rest of us as well. My own awareness of the transformation began in the late 1980s during research for A Childhood's Future, a book about the new realities of family life. I think often of a wonderfully honest comment made by Paul, a fourth grader in San Diego. I like to play indoors better, because that's where the electrical outlets are. In many classrooms, I heard variations on that statement. True, for many children, nature still offers wonder. But for many others, playing in nature seemed so unproductive, off limits, alien, cute, dangerous, televised. What I just read to you was an excerpt from Richard Lou's book, Last Child in the Woods. It's a revolutionary book that came out in the last decade that talks about the disconnectedness that current generations have from the natural world. And as I look around, I see a spectrum of ages here. We have some young people, some older people. And I'm sure that if we went around and talked about our experiences with nature when we were young, we would come up with a spectrum as well. Current generations are simply not connecting to the land like previous generations did. Some are, but on the whole, there's a disconnect. The fact of the matter is that these are the future stewards of our public lands. And if they do not make a connection with these landscapes, the future of our public lands will be in peril. Because when the chainsaws come, when the bulldozers come, when Congress wants to pass a bill to open up all federal wilderness areas to motorized recreation, or oil development, or coal development, if they don't see the value of these places, they will disappear. Tennessee Wild is a coalition of 8 conservation groups that are focused on the Cherokee National Forest, which is public lands here in East Tennessee. The Cherokee is 650,000 acres, significantly larger than the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And the Smokies, by the way, is split up between Tennessee and North Carolina. So if you take the Tennessee portion of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, the Cherokee is almost 3 times larger. Wilderness is the highest form of protection for our public lands. It protects these lands in perpetuity, from logging, from development. It allows you to hike, to hunt, to fish, to camp, to horseback ride, to photograph, to rock climb. No motors of any kind. It also includes chainsaws. We maintain wilderness trails with crosscut saws, old-timey, 5-foot-long crosscut saws. Tennessee Wild was formed to pass a federal bill, an act of Congress, to designate nearly 20,000 acres of the Cherokee National Forest as protected forever. The forest has been recommended to receive some additional wilderness protections, but it takes an act of Congress. My job is to connect people with place, because people will not protect what they do not know and love. So if we go out there and we stand under the midst of a waterfall, or we hear the wind through the leaves and the canopy, or we roll over a log and find an amazing salamander, or have an encounter with a mammal. Much of the beauty, by the way, of the Cherokee is subtle. It's not like the Rocky Mountains with snow-capped mountains. But here's one of the key things. In that subtlety, here in Tennessee, we have arguably the most biologically rich temperate forests in the entire world. When you're talking about flora and fauna and the diversity that's found in the Cherokee, it is simply off the charts. Some of you have gone snorkeling with me. When we go in Citico Creek, it has nearly 3 times the species of fishes that are found in the entire Colorado River watershed, which is a 6-state region, probably about 1/5 of the lower 48 in terms of land mass. The little teeny creek is just filled with life. This is a piece by Sybil Peretti, who is originally from Germany. She currently lives in New Orleans. I actually corresponded with her a little bit. It's called Victor. This is a photograph of a feral child that was found living in the woods in Germany. She was really moved by this image and the fact that this change that I just talked about is occurring, that we are, in fact, disconnected.
Today, and I watched a couple of deer, I watched a snapping turtle that had left the pond and was bedded down the hill. I listened to sandhill cranes flying overhead. And it's funny that you talk about we play where the electrical outlets are. What did I do as soon as I got back to the house? I made a cup of tea, I sat down on my computer, and on Facebook I posted that I was listening to sandhill cranes.
I believe I like that.
So, you know what I mean?
I'm personally not at peace in my life unless I'm in the woods surrounded by nature. I mean, I have an internal conflict being working downtown the way I do because I love being in nature so much.
One of the things Lou talks about is in terms of childhood development and how that unstructured play is so important. Today, children are involved in organized sports, and there has never been an unhealthier generation of children than the ones that are growing up right now, and they're involved in sports at a greater percentage than they have ever been before. And they're just terribly unhealthy. As a whole, I'm not talking about individual children. So there's some real societal questions here about, we're no more recess. Can't go out and play, Studies show children exposed to natural areas are common. Inmates who have a view from their cell of woods are much better behaved. They don't cause problems. There's an effect. There's an actual effect on the human brain. And when you sever that, there's implications. Some European countries don't allow children to start working with computers until they're 11 and 12 years old. For that very reason. Because interaction with computers changes the way we develop. I mean, when you go out to these hiking groups and see who's maintaining the trails, most of the folks have hair my color. And most of them are older than I am. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but where are the younger